Inside a research facility in Sweden, a scientist named Kambadai was running an experiment on ravens. The setup was simple. A sealed box, a tube sticking out of its side. Place the right object into the tube, a specific rock, the correct weight and shape, and the box opens. Inside the box, a treat. The raven had been shown the technique once. One single demonstration. After that, it was on its own. The raven watched it, remembered it. The next time it saw the box, it selected the correct rock from a tray of objects, including immediately tempting food that it ignored, carried the rock to the tube, dropped it eating, and opened the box. One lesson: perfect execution. From a bird, but that is not the part of the story that made Kabadai stop and stare. The part that made him stop and stare was what happened next. The raven began teaching the other ravens how to do it. And then before Kabadai could document what was happening, it invented its own superior version of the technique. Instead of dropping a rock into the tube, he constructed a small platform of twigs inside the tube and pushed another stick through the platform to force the mechanism open. A completely novel solution, more complex, more efficient, something no human had shown it, something it had derived by itself from its understanding of the underlying problem. Kabadai had to remove the bird from the experiment before it could teach the others its better method. He was not angry, he was astonished. It's not just the fact they have these skills independently, said his colleague, Matthias, a cognitive zoologist and principal investigator of the Raven Research Program at Lund University in Sweden. But to use them together, to make these complex decisions, that's what makes it so amazing. The raven had displayed in a single experimental session tool use, observational learning that it passed to peers, creative problem solving, and spontaneous innovation producing an improved technique for cognitive abilities. One bird, one session, in an animal with a brain the size of a walnut. To understand why this matters so much, why scientists who have spent careers studying animal cognition describe raven intelligence as not just surprising but genuinely you need to understand what we thought we knew about which animals were capable of what. For most of the history of cognitive science, the hierarchy was assumed. Humans at the top, great apes, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans. Below us, capable of tool use, some social learning, limited planning, monkeys below that, and somewhere far further down the list, birds with their small brains. Their 300 millennial evolutionary distance from mammals, and their stubborn refusal to fit into the neat cognitive categories that primate research had spent decades building. The assumption was architectural. Mammals have a neocortex, the six-layered outer structure of the brain that, in humans, underlies complex cognition, planning, abstract thought, and language. Birds do not have a neocortex. The mammalian neocortex is so central to the neuroscientific understanding of intelligence that its absence in birds was taken for most of the 20th century as nearly definitive evidence that birds could not perform the cognitive tasks that required it. But the Raven research and decades of parallel work on corvids, the family of birds, that includes ravens, crows, jays, and magpies, has systematically demonstrated is that the brain does not need to be built a specific way to achieve specific outcomes. The pallium, the region of the avian brain that roughly corresponds in function to the mammalian cortex, achieves similar computational results through a completely different architecture, different wiring, different structure, same capabilities. In cognitive science, the same complex abilities, planning, tool use, social learning, theory of mind arising independently in lineages that split from each other 320 million years ago, not inherited from a common ancestor, revolved from scratch in different tissue through different neural pathways to solve the same problems. The raven did not inherit its intelligence from us. It built its own. Let's go through what is confirmed, because the confirmed science is extraordinary enough that no embellishment is needed. Tool use. Ravens have been documented using tools in 11 distinct modes, of which 5 constitute what researchers formally classify as tooling, the deliberate use of an external object as a functional extension of the body to achieve a goal. They use sticks to probe bark crevices for insects. They use stones and other objects to crack hard-shelled food. They use leaves as scoops to carry water. In laboratory settings, 2 ravens spontaneously, without being shown, used a stick to push food out of a horizontal tube they could not reach with their beak. Spontaneous, unprompted, first-time tool. In a species not classified as a natural tool user. Planning, Osvath, in Kabadai's 2017 study, published in the journal Science, is the most comprehensive demonstration yet that ravens plan for the future. They were taught to use a specific tool to open a specific box to get a reward. The box and tool were then taken away. An hour later, they were offered a tray of objects, one of which was the correct tool, along with an immediately available food reward. About 80% of the time, the ravens chose the tool and ignored the immediate food, correctly anticipating that the box would return and that the tool would be needed. The experiment was repeated with a 17-hour delay. Same result. The ravens were selecting an object for a purpose they could not yet achieve against the temptation of an immediate alternative reward. That is, future planning. It had previously been considered an ability confined to humans and great apes. When the experiment was run on ravens in parallel with great apes using the same protocols, the ravens matched the apes in every test. On the bartering test, trading tokens for rewards, they outperformed the apes and matched 4-year-old human children. Social learning and teaching. This is the part confirmed in Kabadi's account. One raven figured out the toolbox technique first. Then it began actively demonstrating the method to other ravens who watched. The other ravens learned by observation. A single observation of tool use by a non-natural tool-using species led to successful replication, which Asvath described as a single observation of tool use by a non-tool-using species. Astonishing. Social transmission of a learned technical skill between birds. Voluntarily. Innovation. The raven that taught the others then independently developed a twig platform. Method and novel solution to the same problem. More complex than the one it had been shown, derived from its own understanding of the mechanism. It was not taught this. It invented it, and it had to be removed from the experiment before it could transmit the innovation to the group. Because at that point, the experiment would no longer be testing what it was designed to test. For cognitive capacities, tool use, planning, social, teaching, creative innovation. In a bird with a brain the size of a walnut that split from the mammalian lineage before the dinosaurs were gone, the raven that innovated the twig platform technique has been called, in the coverage of Kabadis's research, the future ruler of the Raven Kingdom. It is a joke, but it is also not entirely a joke, because what that bird demonstrated, the ability not just to use a tool, not just to learn a tool technique from demonstration, not just to transmit a technique socially, but to analyze the underlying problem well enough to derive a superior novel solution, is a form of intelligence that has specific implications for how we understand the cognitive requirements for cultural transmission. Culture in the anthropological sense requires 3 things: a behavior that is learned rather than innate, transmission of that behavior from individual to individual within a group, an accumulation of improvements over time as individuals build on what they have been taught. The raven demonstrated all 3 in a single experimental session. It is not culture in the full human sense. No one is claiming that, but it is the cognitive substrate of culture, the raw materials out of which culture is built, operating in a bird's brain 300 million years removed from our own lineage. This matters far beyond the specific finding about ravens. Because if convergent cognitive evolution can produce this substrate independently in birds, in a lineage that never had a neocortex, never had an opposable thumb, never had a social structure remotely like early human societies, then the question of which animals might possess similar capacities becomes much harder to answer confidently than we previously assumed. Crows have been shown to make and use tools with comparable sophistication. New Caledonian crows manufacture hook tools from materials they have never encountered before, in forms that match the specific task they need to perform, with a level of engineering precision that astonishes researchers who have spent careers studying primate tool use. Scrub jays demonstrate episodic memory. They remember what they cached, where, and when, adjusting their catching behavior based on whether they were watched by other jays who might steal from them, which implies a theory of mind, an understanding that other birds have knowledge, intentions, and agendas of their own. Magpies passed the mirror self-recognition test, the standard experimental measure of self-awareness, despite not having the neural architecture that the test was originally designed to probe. The corvid family, as a whole, is doing things that the textbooks of 30 years ago categorically assigned to a cognitive tier that birds were not supposed to inhabit. And the raven, the largest, the most widespread, the one with the most complex social behavior and the widest ecological range, may be the most cognitively capable of all of them. Here's what I want you to take from this story. The raven has been living alongside humans for longer than recorded history. It appears in Norse mythology as Odin's companion. In the Bible, in the Quran, in the traditions of indigenous peoples across the northern hemisphere. In every culture that has lived near ravens, the birds have been observed closely enough to be noticed. Their intelligence, their curiosity, their apparent understanding of human behavior, their ability to remember individual human faces, to hold grudges, to play elaborate games with each other, and occasionally with other species. For most of that history, we watched the ravens and told stories about them. We noticed they were different. We built mythology around the difference. And then, in a laboratory in Sweden in 2017, we designed a rigorous experiment to measure exactly what they were doing and why. And we found that the mythology had been understating it. The raven was not magic. It was not supernatural. It was a bird with a walnut-sized brain built by 300 million years of evolution into a cognitive architecture that can plan, remember, teach, learn, and invent without an opposable thumb. Without any of the structural features that cognitive science spent a century insisting were prerequisites for those abilities. It was more extraordinary than the myth. It is always more extraordinary than the myth. The raven that invented the twig platform technique and taught the method to its peers was removed from the experiment before it could contaminate the data. The scientist who removed it called it the future ruler of the Raven Kingdom. He was running a controlled experiment on animal cognition. He needed clean data. But somewhere in the back of his mind, watching a bird construct a novel tool, while simultaneously transmitting a learned technique to a group of watching peers, one imagines that he paused for just a moment, because what he was watching, a single individual figuring out a better way to do something, and sharing that better way with the group, is the most basic description of how human knowledge has accumulated across all of recorded history. A bird did it in an afternoon. If this story changed how you look at the next raven you see, share it, because they have been watching us for 40,000 years, and they understood us long before we understood them. Subscribe, because every week, the natural world is doing something more extraordinary than we gave it credit for.